Alright, so today I have just one quick game of Kano versus Dash. This is actually Commoner, and I think that Kano kind of went under the radar because people assumed that Kano would just be terrible in Commoner. And it might very well be, but I think it's probably the hero that I'm going to try next at a recent Commoner event. I tried to essentially do nothing Oldhim, expecting to hit Dash. And there, to be fair, there was 3 Dash out of 12 players, and I didn't hit I didn't face any of them. I did face 2 chains, a Bravo. The Bravo mirror was miserable, and then I played against Prism, and Prism was excellent for do nothing Oldhim. Um, the chain matchups, I split those. So, but anyway, that's not what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm playing Kano Commoner. So Kano obviously loses a couple of key pieces when switching from normal Blitz to Commoner. There's all the key Majestics that are just gone. Either Wildfire, probably most notably, um, and then some other random things like you can't play Forked Lightning or Stir, things like that. Um, so what can you play instead? So Kano just has lots of just generically good arcane damage, and yes, while your opponent can just play a bunch of null runes, you can generally kind of poke damage through. And then the other thing that it has going for it is that so I never played Arcane Rising Limited, but a lot of the commons work pretty well with Kano. So I'm gonna be playing a couple of those random cards against my opponent here, who's just Dash, which I assume is just gonna be move forward as quickly as possible, and we'll see what happens. So we're kind of coming um, in in the middle of the action here. So they start off with their locked and loaded. They have Hope Merchant's Hood. I think I'm not. I don't know what's in their hand that they needed to get rid of this early, and that's kind of an interesting setup. You notice against my opponent that essentially their only arcane barrier is from Achilles, right? So this is this looks pretty decent for me, and they're going first. If memory serves, they chose to go first against me, which so typically against Kano and Blitz you don't want to go first because they can just poke damage off the top with Kano's ability. But I think in Dash specifically, I don't know. I think Dash and Counter probably wants to go second because you don't want to lose tempo from getting blocked out with your initial hits. But in this case, I managed to just block a bunch of stuff, and then so they play a payload for 6, and I break all my equipment kind of early, which you might think is kind of dodgy, but Dash is a very fast deck, so I kind of want to make sure to maintain my life as decently as possible against him. And also, if I can block out the payload red, I mean, I think that means they're only coming in with the worst attacks later. Now here is one of the weirder cards that you can play in Commoner. So it's Rifting, which is a card honestly I never even heard of until I built this deck. Uh, so in this case, it has the ability that um, if it hits, then you can play another like a non-attack action as an instant, which Kano is obviously filled with. So in this particular case, I'm playing this for 6 and I'm floating one. So uh, if it hits, I'll be able to play Zap and then play Snapback because I'm playing Zap, right? So if it hits, I can do tons of damage, and if it doesn't hit, I'm sucking 2 cards out of their hand. So I think it's pretty good in this case. I'm not sure how it holds up in prolonged testing, but we'll find out. And then I probably should talk to it. I'm just playing 3 armor against Dash and then Mage Master's Boost. The boots I didn't end up using, I think, this game, but they seem pretty good in theory. So my opponent tanks for a while. They're actually going to go through several cycles of what cards they want to block with. Um, but they do end up blocking it out, which is probably, I think, the good thing. I don't know if you want to like a Kano with 2 cards in hand and 1 floating resource and get anywhere with this rifting ability, but yeah, so they keep going back and forth. One thing that's kind of a tell is they show me that the second payload is in hand, the second red payload. So at least I know what to look out for. And you'll see, I think you'll see that later in this game. The play pattern is a little bit different because I think Commoner is actually quite a fun and interesting format, and that blocks matter a ton. So whereas like normal Blitz, not so much. So anyway, he does. Or sorry, my opponent fully blocks. So I end up arsenaling the snapback, and I'm gonna keep the zap in hand. Um, because the snapback I care about having more since it adds more damage. The zap I care less about playing necessarily, so I don't want to care. I don't really want that in the arsenal. I do have these Timekeeper's Whims, which are really nice cards from Everfest for this particular for Commoner specifically, um, and yeah, in this case, I'm trying to block out their attack again, trying to keep my life total relatively high because I don't want to just die to a bunch of damage. But I think I end up taking some of these pistol hits, because this next turn I want to be able to play Zap and then maybe one of the snapbacks. Probably Zap and then play the Arsenal snapback and then Arsenal the other snapback. But we'll see what I do. Yeah, so I think I'm debating what to do, whether or not I want to fire up the Crucible. If I fire up Crucible, I'm going to lose another card in my hand. So I can't do that because I want to be able to play the snapback. So they take the Zap damage, and then I'm going to play the snapback out of Arsenal. Pitching that, I'm going to put Timekeepers down there because Timekeepers is worth a lot of, it's a pretty hefty amount of damage, especially because they're on AB1. So now let me pause the video briefly. So the other thing that you can play in Kano and Commoner, because you're playing attacks, right? You're sort of playing a mix of arcane and attacks, because you don't really have enough arcane, just pure arcane damage to just be that. The other thing you can play is Sun's Kiss and Moonwish. So these cards seem kind of memey at first, and arguably they are. But the advantage is that Moonwish lets you play the Sunkiss on top of your deck, and then you can use Kano. As an alternate cost to play Moonwish, right? You put the Sunkiss on top, then use Kano to play the Sunkiss. And so in that case, you get your 3 life, you draw your card. So it's pretty sweet, I think, in that case. If it ever actually happens. It doesn't end up going off in this game. But also just gaining life in a format where you can't gain life otherwise is pretty decent. The other thing I have is Scar for a Scar, because you start turn 0 with that being active. So let's resume the video and let's see what my opponent dumps out towards me. So I got this 0 to 60 yellow. I think so their hyperdrivers are done, which is very good. And I don't think this is the turn where they try to pivot. There is one turn where they basically try and do like 14 damage. We'll see that coming up. So they play the Rotor Ram and locked a loaded blue, which is pretty weak, I think, all things considered. So this is just Zipper for 4. So they had to play 3 cards to make this worth 6 damage, which is kind of whatever. I don't know. I think I just block with the Voltic Bolt because I'm going to gain 3 life next turn. So I'm going to play Scar for a Scar and then play Sun's Kiss. Yeah, so Scar for a Scar, that's 4. I'll see if they end up blocking this. You might notice, so I'll post my link is posted below in the description. You'll notice I keep drawing a lot of reds because this is sort of Rev 1 of this commoner list. Yeah, actually, I pull it up right here. So you can see there's quite a lot of reds in the list. So I probably need to make it a little bit more blue because I think I activate Kano maybe once, which I think is fine. Yeah, so this is the turn where they're essentially using everything and they're going to dump out their whole hand. So it's a zoom in for 14. But it's not dominate. So I think you want to do what they did ideally on a payload turn. But so I just block it fully out, and then my turn just gonna draw it, which is I think fine. So they did poke a little damage that in, so I'm getting a little bit lower, partially into a somewhat dangerous level, I think. But fortunately, I have several blues in my hand, so I think next turn I can probably, depending on what they play out, I can play the Voltic Bolt for for 6 damage. Crucible to Voltic. That's one advantage of just playing it with a single blue. So I could block with one of the other blues, and I would lose 1 life, but I think I'm okay. That's exactly what I do. So then on my turn, I can either play the Timekeeper's Whim, or I can just buff the Voltic Bolt, which is the better play, because that does more damage, right? And I think I might eat this and go to 3. Yeah, so I'm going to go 3, because then on their turn, they're going to take a minimum of 5 damage, because I'm going to play the Ether Flare Blue, buff it. They only have the AB1 because of Achilles. Yeah. So I think my opponent is debating how to block this out. They end up pitching. I think it looks like a 0 yellow. So now they're on 3 cards, and they're at 5, which is a dangerous place to be, because despite the fact that this deck does have a mix of attacks, it is mostly arcane damage, so I can still Kano off the top and do stuff, right? And there's nothing that'll let me play my Timekeeper's Whim as an instant, but, well, Actually, yeah, there's nothing. So, but I think that's all right. So now in this case, I have kind of a key decision of whether or not to try and go off, or try and actually block it out. So I think in this case, because I need to do 6 damage total, right? Uh, so there's a zap there, and then there's an ether flare again on top. So that's the top 2 cards: a zap and an ether flare. So that's basically lethal right there, right? So I'm going to play the ether flare, buff it with crucible, and that's going to do that's going to add so much more damage to that zap. And I think even if I whiffed, I could probably have tried to block out. So this was kind of a little. I did get pretty lucky in that sense because I didn't stack my deck to get to this point, right? But I do think there was a high probability of me hitting reasonably good cards, so I think it was okay. I think if I had done the first Kano and it had just whiffed, then I probably would have tried to just block out their turn. So anyway, that's the game. My opponent was a little bit upset. I think they didn't quite get that Ether Flare had buffed the other damage. But regardless, yeah, Counter Kano felt pretty decent. I think you're mostly just playing kind of normal arcane damage. It feels kind of like vintage Viscerai in some sense when you're playing Kano Commoner, because you're sort of doing a mix of little attacks and also just poking through with arcane damage as opposed to just doing rune chants. So it was actually quite fun, and I think I would probably keep turning to this deck in the future, at least trying to tune it and see what happens. Okay, well, thanks for watching.